Today we have a guest with immense knowledge about the Arctic, its cultures, its history, and its challenges. Amber Lincoln is a doctor of anthropology and works as a curator for the Americas department in the British Museum. Amber has worked day and night the last weeks preparing the temporary exhibition, Citi exhibition Arctic, Culture and Climate at the British Museum. An exhibit that is in display from October 22, 2020 till 21st of February 2021. My name is Jørn Henriksen, and I also have to admit that I'm especially looking forward to this conversation, as the exhibition in part tells the story of my own ancestors. And I believe some of the things we talk about today will be part of the backdrop when I'm in my daily work as the director of expedition operations in Viking. Amber, welcome to Viking.TV.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Here.
Yeah. Thank you for taking the time to come here and talk about the exhibition. You had a grand opening a few days ago.
Yeah, that's right. It was on a virtual opening.
Yeah. Is it? But it's possible to visit the exhibit in the British Museum, and I guess you have the same challenges as many, and I've read that in UK particularly goes into some kind of lockdown situation at the moment. So I hope you persevere the corona challenges going forward.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I think we're not quite certain about how it will affect us, but we should know in the coming days. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Amber, you're the curator for this particular exhibit, and we're going to talk a little bit more about your role and so on. But in the beginning, we have a few images from this that we have collected, and I wonder, could you please talk us through some of them?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is toward the beginning of the exhibition, and I think your very astute viewers will notice that we are missing one clothing outfit here. So this was taken partly during the installation of the exhibition. But this greets visitors as they walk in. So what people are seeing are Indigenous clothing in Siberia. So the one sort of closest to us, the parka is a Chukchi girls parka, so in Chukotka. The missing one, you see, I'm sure your visitors will appreciate that COVID has created a number of challenges for everyone, and so one of the challenges that it brought to us was the loans, the objects that we loaned from other institutions. It was kind of a challenge to bring those objects and to make sure that they got to London. So through all kinds of efforts from many people, including the Russian ambassador to the UK, we did eventually get these beautiful objects from St. Petersburg, from the Kunstkamera Museum of Anthropology. So since this photo has been taken, we have an Evenki shaman costume from the early 1800s. Next to that is a woman's nenets, winter parka, and then a Conti, a women's Conti dress, and then Jørn, you can probably tell us a little bit about the very large man, Sami man's dukti, the clothing. I guess this is more of a summer clothing item, and except for the boots. I have to admit that the boots are winter.
Yeah, we call the boots skaller.
Skala. Okay,
Yeah.
right, excellent. Yeah.
And we used to have this this loop in the front so you can attach to a binding.
The ski, yeah, right. Yeah, so on the other side, so you kind of greeted by, these, indigenous clothing representing these different, the circumpolar, indigenous circumpolar people. And in the center of that, you're greeted by the circumpolar map and from the northern perspective, which I suppose we should have, I should have sent you a copy of that too. It's quite interesting to see the world from the North Pole perspective.
Yes, yeah, and we're going to touch upon that a little later. What is the Arctic?
Yes.
And how do we frame the Arctic? So
okay. We can go into that more. Yeah.
It's a whole part of the conversation, and it's not as obvious as you might think it is. I think.
Yeah. There's many ways, right? Many ways to just define the Arctic. So, yes. And so just this is a sort of studio shot, but this kind of a young woman or maybe even a teenage girl Greenlandic costume. So this is the Greenlandic national costume. And, these are just absolutely beautiful, but, typically worn during important celebrations, graduations, weddings, various ceremonies and church celebrations as well. So, so people enter the exhibition and sort of are greeted by this diversity of clothing. I think what's nice about it is it shows just how diverse, and how many different groups, indigenous communities are in the Arctic. So, at this point, roughly 40 different distinct cultural groups in the north, and with specific histories and languages. So, yes, that's kind of starts us out.
Yeah, and I can kind of envision it in my head walking into that exhibit, seeing the clothing, and to me it sounds really right, because what people wear represents so much, and perhaps the most important is the identity you get from wearing it.
Yeah.
especially sort of the I'd say the party clothes, if you like.
Yeah.
That Greenlandic costume. It's probably the equivalent to the Norwegian bunad.
Yeah.
Yes. Amongst the Norwegian people, not the Sami people, because they have their own Sami costumes that are very elaborate.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. For specific groups and specific families. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I wanted to ask you, Amber, a very kind of overarching, why an exhibition on the Arctic? How did it come about? Why did you decide to focus on the Arctic?
So Jago Cooper, who's he's sort of head of the America section at the British Museum, he proposed an exhibition in this an Arctic climate change exhibition in 2013. So it's way a long time ago. And then I started working in the department in about 2016, and I have a background in northern in northern anthropology, and so I've continued to push for this exhibition, and we Jago really felt he wanted museums, and the British Museum in particular, to be focusing on these important, worldwide questions that we all have, right? Issues that we're dealing with on local, national, and international arenas. And so, climate change, global climate change, is certainly something that we're all facing. It is global, but we all have specific local issues associated with it. And in particular, climate change in the Arctic isn't some future scenario in which people are going to have to deal with, in 20, 30, 40 years. People have been dealing with it for the past 40 years, and it's rapidly getting worse, but it just made a lot of sense to discuss these issues in the Arctic. To also add to that, the British Museum has quite a large collection of at least North American Arctic objects, and so that was also an important justification to sort of make these collections aware, make these collections known to Arctic residents, but also just the world more generally. So it was kind of a nice fit, and then the sort of, I guess, the language and the sort of political landscape of climate change has really changed since 2013. We went from kind of conversations with the British Museum about, do we focus too much on climate change? Toward the end, like, are we talking about climate change enough? So I mean, things have really changed in just those 7-8 years. So I think it's kind of interesting how exhibitions emerge. But I should also add that this exhibition we've really tried to work closely with Indigenous Arctic communities, and it's and so I have worked with I've worked in Alaska for a number of years and various places, and a project curator, Peter Luvers, has also worked for a number of years with Gwich'in communities in Canada. So we've tried to bring this in, and so that it's we're trying to bring Indigenous perspectives to London and to this exhibition.
I think it's very, very interesting, and whilst you were talking, we showed some images, and I noticed that a couple of those images are from Svalbard, and Svalbard is within the Norwegian Arctic, very high. Here's one, and in Svalbard there are polar bears. There's a lot of people, but Svalbard has never been it's archipelago where we're going to sail with our expedition ships, but it has never had an indigenous population. Right. However, a little bit further north or further south in Norway mainland, our Arctic indigenous population, the Sami people are, and virtually all the other places around the Arctic there are indigenous people. And one of the things I wondered was that kind of a selection criteria for your kind of choice of the Arctic? Because being from the Arctic, I've seen so many different and interesting sort of definitions. One is the definition of a person living at the equator. What is the Arctic? Then the whole Scandinavian peninsula is the Arctic. Other definitions is where it's permafrost, and others are where it's below 10 degrees medium temperature in July, and so on. So there's and you have the Arctic Circle at 66 degrees. So what was your scope?
Well, I think, yeah, that's right. I mean, there's many definitions of the Arctic, and a lot of people at this moment are talking about, climate change. So I should just back up and say, you know, we really wanted, amid these discussions about global climate change, we really wanted to bring the local voices to this discussion, and put the sort of human face, if you will, into these discussions. When you live in places like London or New York, or it's easy to forget that Indigenous Arctic people have been living in the Arctic for 30,000 years, and are in fact, working with their own scientists, or working with their own organizations to raise awareness about climate change and come up with solutions. So we felt it important to sort of bring that perspective to these wider discussions about climate change. So I guess I should start with that, and then I'll go back and answer your question about definition. So, I mean, certainly, as you say, there's a number of ways of defining the Arctic. So we could talk about the sort of physical geographer's definition of the 66-degree parallel, which kind of corresponds to that having at least one day, one polar night, one midnight sun, and that's sort of that imaginary mathematical line that just happens to be when the furthest point south in which you can have a 24 hours of daylight or 24 hours of darkness. And yeah, I mean, so that's kind of useful to know. But when you're talking about people who have lived in the Arctic and have sort of, created, livelihoods and a lifestyle and, rich cultural heritage, another way to think about it is in terms of these, traditional or historical livelihoods. So the Arctic, one thing is it hasn't tolerated agriculture very well. So in order for people to live well there, you hunt or fish, or you reindeer herd, and so many people, define it by these, historical livelihoods. Now, that's not to say that, Indigenous Arctic people don't engage in many different kinds of economic activities today, for sure, but historically, these were the ways of making a living, if you will. So those are some, and I think they don't always overlap in terms of how they work. So for instance, in our exhibition, we included from Alaska, Unganon or Aleut cultures.
Which is south of the Arctic Circle.
Which is pretty far south of the Arctic Circle, and the reason why we felt that that was permissible, if you will, is we're really kind of talking about Inuit Aleut cultural groups and the ways of life. They share a sort of family language group. There has been historical trading and engagement across the, from those Aleut regions all the way up through northern Alaska. So yes, so we took a few liberties, if you will, and used different definitions. So.
Yeah, and once you introduce kind of a cultural criteria into that, you also have to go below the actual Arctic Circle. I mean, for Norway, you would have to if Sami was.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So yeah, that is good to understand, because as I understand, culture has helped to define the Arctic,
Yeah, exactly. And you know, and climate to some extent. You know, I think you know what I sort of constantly say is that these are cultural groups who have made warm and hospitable homelands out of systems of ice, and I think there's an incredible diversity in the Arctic. Among cultural groups. Over 4-5 different large language families, and several hundred languages, and as you could see with the clothing, of course, different cultural traditions. One thing that people share is this, this they're kind of united around ice and snow and cold ecosystems, and so we really kind of raised the question in the exhibition, if this ice is gone in 80 years, as climate scientists predict, then what happens to these rich ways of life? And so I guess, we kind of define our Arctic around this ice and what happens around that snow and ice. Not just the sea ice, but river ice. Permafrost, the frozen soil underneath, on the ground. And I think what's interesting is that, these different groups of people, for millennium have sort of used ice and snow, permafrost in very interesting ways, and with so much innovation, and it's quite remarkable to think, to learn about, and to hear from from hunters, from reindeer herders, from people who live and travel this way. And so I guess we kind of define it around ways of living, I guess, with the environment.
Yes. And I read this wonderful book that you sent me from the exhibition. I probably haven't read every single letter in it, but I've been through a few articles. It's absolutely wonderful, and I realized that much of the focus is on resilience. Resilience is a word that I read ever so often in this book. And what is resilience in this setting?
Yeah. I mean, so I guess resilience is an ability to, or the capacity to sort of deal with change, deal with hardship, and still maintain some of your identity or function or capacity. So I think one of the themes throughout this exhibition is we're tracking change, right? We're tracking environmental change through the deep past, sort of long-term climate histories over the last 30,000 years, in which the climate has changed over gradually over hundreds of thousands of years, and different groups of people have adapted. They've used different material innovations to deal with these sometimes disturbances, or sometimes dramatic change in the environment. And I guess what we sort of see is that there's these strategies that have been used by Arctic people, these resilient strategies like cultural adaptation, material innovation, and lastly, but probably most important, is this incredible collaboration, cooperation between individuals, between different groups of people. We certainly see that today in international arenas like the Inuit Circumpolar Council. But I think, so we've tracked that change, those resilience strategies for dealing with long-term climate change. But then we also show that I think what's particularly interesting about it is that the social changes, that Indigenous Arctic people have dealt with, within the last, mostly within the last 300 years, although in northern Scandinavia and Sapmi region, it's been much longer. But the social difficulties of colonialism, state-imposed religions, relocations, forced relocation, moving to different economies, and when people are confronted with these sort of adversity, resilience is the way you deal with that, right? And we continue to see both in climate, environmental, and social change, we see these cultural adaptation, material innovation, and collaboration. So I think, one thing, these are difficult topics, right? Global climate change can be a real downer, but I think we're trying to make the point that that in fact there is hope. I mean, there are people who could in fact show us a few things, right, about dealing with dramatic change.
Yes. Yeah. And well, talking for myself, I have a feeling that there is some kind of kinship between northern people, if you like.
Yeah.
And obviously, historically, there has been travels in the east and west direction, and Norwegians have gone to Russia, the Kola Peninsula, the White Sea, and to Nenets, and to those regions, and the Pomor people in the White Sea have come to North Norway, and there was a trade, and there was trade on rivers, and I think I have seen kind of a kinship between people, and talking for myself, having traveled much of the Arctic, there is an east-west axis that is perhaps not very obvious to.
Yeah, I think this is where we need that map, that circumpolar map. Once you see the world from the North Pole perspective, you realize that it's far, but it's not like terribly far. And there was all kinds of for thousands of years, people, as you say, have been traveling widely, exchanging ideas, exchanging material. So I think there is sort of both a kindredness and a kinship, in this sort of northern people.
I certainly do think so, but I also noticed, obviously, that perhaps it's particular for Norway, but I don't think so. Northern people are also a part of globalization, and there are things happening that is just taking part in the modern world in a way.
Yeah.
Is that kind of a driver for resilience strategies as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think there's anything particularly new about this this idea of participating in globalization. I mean, if you look at the history of Indigenous Arctic people, they have traded widely, and encouraged that trade. If you look at, for instance, the Bering Strait, between Chukotka and Alaska, there was very early exchange ivory, walrus ivory for metal. In Ust-Puloy, up in Salgard in northwest Russia, people were trading very early and engaging in global markets 2,000 years ago, and using the river systems to travel from the high north down to the south, right? So I think, yeah, absolutely. Today people across the Arctic, some Indigenous Arctic people live in the Arctic, others, live in New York and elsewhere, and engage in all kinds of, global activities. I don't think there's anything new or surprising about that. Yeah. Right.
Do you think? I'm thinking, was there because we're talking about times long before the Reformation, for example.
Yeah.
And do you think there was less kind of these policies that came about after the Reformation, and colonization and assimilation strategies that were used upon indigenous people in the Arctic, that in 2005, 3 or 5, I believe, the Norwegian king went out and excused on behalf of the Norwegian state the assimilation policies that it had towards the Sami people. In 27, the Norwegian Prime Minister called it the dark chapter of Norwegian history, and that to me, I have a feeling it wasn't like that. If you go far enough back in time, it was much more of a kind of equal, trade relationship.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. I think one thing about this sort of as you mentioned, the Reformation and the different things, that has had it's similar. I think there are some similarities between this. The sort of repercussions and the impact of colonialism to what's happening now with how communities are dealing with global climate change, and the impact on them is in some ways similar. I mean, the sort of social change and the sort of new economies, that were brought about by, as you say, the Norwegian government, or the Canadian government, the Russian conquest of Siberia, those changes happen very rapidly, and I think so people's capacity to adapt to that is really strange, right? If you don't have if you have to suddenly, within your generation, within your lifetime, do something entirely different, it's much harder. But I think this is where it's similar to global climate change today, because of this rapid change. I think I've said before, climates in the Arctic, the climate has changed in the Arctic over the time in which humans inhabited the Arctic. The past 30,000 years, the Arctic has seen different climates, but it has changed relatively slowly compared to these rapid changes. And the change today with climate change, the problem is that the knowledge, the stories, that the way that people predict weather, the way that they respond to autumn storms, it's based on information that's obsolete now. It's largely becoming obsolete because of this rapid change. And I think that's where you get this similarity, and that's where we find that in this exhibition, through exciting ways of looking at objects, you see these examples of this, material innovations in these in this collaboration, the way the sort of capacities in which people use to sort of get over this, to deal with adversity, right?
And one of the things I noted when I prepared and after having thought of sort of climate change, because it tends to have a very negative connotation to it. And obviously, you know, something that has the power to decimate a culture, you know, deserves perhaps that negative connotation. At the same time, I read in a Greenlandic newspaper where someone made the case that, you know, in this fjord where they traditionally hunted on sea ice in the wintertime was now, you know, it was getting later ice and it disappeared earlier, and eventually that fjord is probably not going to have any ice whatsoever. And the case that was made by indigenous Inuits in Greenland was that this was an advantage because, you know, the hunting became more efficient.
Yeah. I think that's absolutely right. There are many different perspectives on this, and there's, you know, in some ways, you know, life might be easier in some respects, and certainly I've heard that as well, you know, and another thing is, you know, new animals are coming up, you know, that we can, you know, hunt, and this is okay. You know, there's in northern Alaska, there's salmon that are moving into areas where they hadn't before, and those are welcome. So I think, yeah, you're right. And again, you know, this is why I think it's important to bring these stories to sort of, you know, an urban audience that often has this very binary climate change narrative, right? And just to get into the subtleties of these different perspectives.
Yeah. And I think I think that is a little bit what Viking usually does when we're out sailing, which we haven't done for a while now, but we're keen on starting, and I'm working on a project where we come out with expedition ships, and we're, you know, this is exactly what we're going to do. We're going to go to places where we can, where we will meet indigenous people. We already do it in the Arctic Norway. We have some voyages in the wintertime to see the aurora borealis, and we visit. This is from one of these voyages I took part in 2019, and we go to Masi to see to visit the Sami family, and you know that these are large families, and they're kind of the family alone is running a corporation, if you like, where reindeer herding is in the core of it. And you mentioned there is perhaps a need for urban people to understand these things deeper than kind of the binary, you know, dualisms that we see, and obviously being a tourist operator, you know, we have to reflect on it, obviously, because we're creating these cultural meetings, and they can go all kinds of directions, but they can go really, really well if you do it with respect, and that's why I really wanted to quote our chairman in this conversation, because he once said that when you meet people of different cultures, you really figure out we're pretty much the same. And I think that will help diffuse a lot of the tensions we have in the world today. And that's one of the things that I've seen in practicality, you know, when sailing into Greenland, into Arctic Canada, North Norway, that kind of creating a meeting point where you can actually, with respect, discuss these things without kind of bringing in all the bad luggage.
Yeah, well, for sure. people speaking directly is always there's always a benefit, isn't there?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. I think tourism has a role. Museums have a role. So in some ways, I don't know. Do you think museums and tourism are related in that sense?
Yeah, absolutely, aren't they? I mean, you know, they're both sort of, trying to sort of bring something, bring something different into somebody else's life, right?
Yes. You know, one of the things to prepare for this conversation, I did a call to a colleague of mine sitting in Canada, and we discussed a little bit the policies between kind of the Canadians and the Indigenous people further north in Canada and on some of the coasts and so on. And I think we kind of, I don't know exactly how it is in Canada, and he probably don't know exactly how it is in Norway. Perhaps none of us knows exactly what it's like anywhere, but he had the sense that Canada is kind of lagging behind on that realization that assimilation was challenging, and his impression was that Norway was perhaps a couple of decades ahead of Canada in some of those things. What is the situation around the Arctic, and is that something you recognize or?
Yeah, I mean, so I guess just to briefly mention, there's sort of 8 Arctic nations politically, right, and 7 of them, all but Iceland, have based on the UN Declaration of Indigenous People, have Indigenous Arctic people, and there's roughly 400,000 Indigenous Arctic people today. And I guess just to say this, that, yes, I think their situations vary greatly depending on one of the big ways that they vary is in which nation they are citizens of. So you have Russia, you have Alaska, which is the USA, you have Canada, you have Greenland, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, Finland. Did I get them all? I think I went around. Yeah. So, I wouldn't want to necessarily comment on, how state-sponsored assimilation policies measure up with other state-sponsored assimilation policies. Certainly, I think if your viewers are interested, there's some really great Indigenous organizations that sort of can lay this out, and the Inuit Circumpolar Council is one, and they have great online resources. RAPON, Russian Arctic. Oh gosh, I'm gonna totally screw up. I'm not even gonna try to do the acronym, but it's RAIPON. So it's the Indigenous people in Russia. And as you know, Jørn better than me, the Sami Council, and these sort of national and international groups come together for and sit on the Arctic Council and sort of talk to governments on the Arctic Council, trying to represent the concerns of their people. And I guess one thing to say is that yes, people, I think Indigenous people throughout the world have still struggle with repercussions from assimilation policies, from language loss. So these kind of policies meant that some people couldn't speak their language. It meant, in other cases, children were removed from families and sent to residential schools. You know, so, and that has led to, you know, disempowerment. You know, but it is good to see these organizations addressing this, and I mean, just to make this connection with climate again, I just want to credit the human rights advocate Inuit woman Sila Wat-Cloutier, who makes this connection between, you know, cultural trauma and planet trauma. And so, you know, she talks about how Inuit have suffered from this intergenerational assimilation policy, and how it has led to, you know, low self-esteem. It's led to you know, some difficult issues like alcoholism and various substance abuses. It's led to violence, and how Inuit recognize those problems and have identified, you know, going back to traditional teachings, you know, so hunting on the ice, for instance, yes, you could learn the technical skill, but it wasn't just about the technical skill, right? It was about developing a confident, patient man, you know, who would then go on to be able to, you know, live life well. And those same skills, you know, again, we go back to this word resilience. Those are resilient skills of being able to deal with scary situations, for instance, right? So the terrible irony is that as various Inuit groups, you know, are trying to go back to historical lessons and teachings like hunting on ice, for instance, at that time, you know, the land is changing, the ice is changing, the environment is changing, and so it's kind of, you know, hitting both cultural and planet trauma at the same time.
Yeah. What's in the future for the Arctic, do you think? Maybe you're not treating that in your exhibition, but you know, what will the Arctic look like in you know, by 2050, for example? Yeah, we've seen a lot. I've seen a lot of changes during my lifetime. Huge changes.
Yeah, I know. You should talk about some of those. I mean, I too have seen changes. And last 2019, I was up in Shishmaref, Alaska in February, and you know, it was open water. So you know, it was pretty frightening. But I don't know. I mean, we all. I guess, you know, climate scientists predict, but I do see a lot of hope. I see a lot of young Indigenous people working for change, and we have tried to address this. I mean, we have tried to sort of make this exhibition also about the future, and we end with this wonderful installation of parkas. Maybe you have the photo of this. Yes, so I think we sent you a photo of this to put up, but essentially this is kids in Pengerton and Kinnaght, Nunavut. So working with the Embassy of the Imagination, which is an arts socially responsive group and they've been they're out of Toronto. They've been working with youth in Nunavut, and they basically created an art piece, which is Japanese paper sewn into parkas and then parkas printed on, and this is really their reflection of a future Arctic. I mean, these are these are the kids who are inheriting a warm Arctic, and so they have been thinking about climate change. They've been traveling with hunters on the land. They've been they learned from local seamstresses how to make warm clothing, and through this sort of process and these workshops, they came to create their own printed parkas as a future reflection on climate change. So you can visit our website and see that there's a film about it. The British
I think
Museum.
we have a couple of images when those are being curated and
when they're being installed. Yes.
Yes. So James, if you find images of parkas, white parkas with some artwork on, and there's a person curating it, here we got them.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So they're really magical to see, and so basically this is when we were installing them. But Kinnate, Cape Dorset, has a long history of printmaking and working with Japanese paper. So in the 1960s, they came up with the idea of doing block prints from local soapstone and printing them on this paper, on Japanese paper, and this technique, they borrowed the technique from Japanese printmakers, actually. So there's a long history of Cape Dorset, Kinnate, carving blocks, making prints, and so this kind of, builds on that history and those traditions. And then the artists used found objects during their workshops. So when they were traveling on the ice, when they went fishing, when they were sewing their own parkas, they also made themselves their own parkas. They would use objects to print on, and then that's what you see. So you see the rifle there on the boys' parka. There's fish, and sealskin. There's the fishing. Yes, and so this those parkas sort of draw inspiration from both the Japanese printmaking traditions and also these silipa, which are these raincoats that are made out of seal gut or seal intestine. And so this is an example here. Again, when it's being installed, this parka comes from Western Alaska, from a Yupik woman. It was made in the 80s, so it's not that old. But these beautiful, waterproof parkas that are sewn with a waterproof stitch, and so they're perfect for berry picking, being out on the tundra. But they're also very good when for kayaking if you don't want to get wet. So
no, it's fantastic, and this is the same image as on the front of your book.
Yes. Yes. So this is absolutely by a wonderful photographer, Keely Yu Yang, and he is award-winning photographer, filmmaker. He is Chinese Nanai. So Nanai are indigenous people kind of in lower, not quite high Arctic Siberia, but a little bit lower. And we saw his work. He's worked for a number of years with Inupiat in northern Alaska, created this absolutely amazing film called Prayer for a Whale, which is about the community in Utqiagvik, or formerly known as Barrow, at the top of Alaska, and just how important whaling is, and both in terms of sort of the nutritional nourishment, but also in the social community sharing and identity. So it's quite a powerful film, and we worked with him to use one of his still photography for the show. But the film is actually a part of the film is what viewers saw at the start of this, and it's also in the exhibition.
Yeah, I love that image, and I love the stories about how that Japanese paper with the prints are inspired, and how culture becomes a cornerstone in these expressions.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's functional art. All of this. This is one thing about Northern material culture. It's all of this stuff is so beautiful, and it functions beautifully as well.
Yeah, I think my impression is that not stuff with non-function whatsoever almost doesn't have a place because it's a culture without too much focus on objects.
People often traveled, and you don't want to be carrying too much, but like this object that they're showing now, so today certainly people are artists and make a living as artists, and I think this is a wall hanging that's sort of this beautiful these sewing techniques that you perhaps used in the past, but now to make again that adapting to the new economy, right? So you take your skills as a seamstress and apply it to this designed, sewn, beautiful wall hanging. So there's a place, I guess, in our day and age now.
Yeah. When I see this image, I think it's beautiful with these colors, and for me, who's grown up north of the tree line, if you like, kind of immediately, I think immediately about the tundra, the Arctic tundra, the colorfulness of barren landscape, where you really have to look carefully to observe the beauty every once in a while, and sometimes it kind of strikes you in the eye like this piece of art does.
Yeah, I think you're right. This was by Hattie Akalak from Baker Lake, Nunavut, and she I think you're right. She really captured that beauty of the summer. When the plants just sort of spring to life with that 24-hour daylight, and I think it really speaks to the idea of that living in the Arctic, that seasonality. That you sort of live seasonally. It's not the sort of desolate white gloom that people often associate with the Arctic. It can there's surprising abundance, there's surprising color. It's just you kind of appreciate it seasonally.
No, and perhaps we can go further in the images where we can appreciate some of the art pieces as well that were printed, and some of the functional art, and some of the more kind of shamanistic art that you have on display, James.
Sure. So this is a wonderful mid 1800s sort of model of a Nenet's reindeer herding winter camp, and so it is. There was this tradition, I guess, of carving of depicting these, I guess, mid 18th century life among Russia's indigenous people, and so these there's a few of them. We have 3 in the exhibition. One we commissioned from a contemporary Saha carver, but this one is from the mid 1800s, and it's carved out of mammoth ivory.
Wow.
So it's just absolutely beautiful. But you get all the details. You know, the dogs chasing the bear. You know, the dogs bothering the reindeer. You know, people eating in the tent. It's just fabulous. With you really get a sense of life.
Yeah, it's gorgeous. It's gorgeous.
Yeah, and then likewise, you know, I guess we think this one is a Conti sled, but yeah, this also this is at the British Museum. This is a British Museum collection. The previous one was from the Cambridge Museum, Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology, but this one again, you know, it raises all these questions. You know, there's sort of either a sleeping, sick, or dead dog in the sled here. You know, so you're thinking about you know, these really detailed carvings just raise all kinds of questions about life. You know, and how people were living and what was happening.
Yeah.
But again, this is ivory, probably either walrus or mammoth tusk ivory.
Yeah, the carvings, I can kind of see the walrus tusk.
Yes.
Because the carvings have to have a long shape in it, if you like.
Yeah. And again, we have some walrus ivory on the top here. This is a wonderful baleen basket. So the black part comes from bowhead whale baleen, and in northern Alaska, typically the Inupiat men would, you know, sort of slice it into these thin pieces and then coil it into these wonderful, you know, sculptural baskets, and then use the walrus ivory to carve the top. And this one, I think, is by Marvin Peter, from Point Hope, Alaska, I think. I'm sorry, my memory is losing it, but it's from I think the 1960s. But this art form is is alive and well in Alaska. There's just beautiful baleen basketry.
Yeah, that looks really, really nice. And this is something older, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. So one thing that I particularly love about Arctic art is how animals are depicted, and you can tell that carvers spent a lot of time observing animals, and I think this sort of moose spoon, you know, just really reflects that. You get so much expression in this carving, but this comes from sort of northwest Russia, along near Salgard. It's about a 2,000-year-old archaeological site called Ust-Ploy, and it was a place where many different cultures, many different, you know, different groups of people, if you will, came together to both trade and to sort of worship. It looks like there was, I guess there's evidence of different ceremonies, and it was also a place, you know, just of exchanging a lot of material. It was right along the Ode River, and so perfect for traveling and trading.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is made out of bone, and I guess it's a spoon.
Yeah, looks very, very nice. Yeah, and it looks like a moose.
Yeah, exactly, and not just a moose, but like you can kind of, you know, this moose is doing something, right? He's pursuing something, you know, and so yeah, I love the expressions that often are so efficiently conveyed.
Yeah, and here's something else. It's metal, yeah, which is kind of a scarcity in the Arctic.
Yeah, and so again at that at that Puloy site, there was quite a bit of metallurgy, and so it wasn't entirely uncommon in northern Russia and in Siberia to have metalwork. But this piece is actually really a wonderful clash or collaboration of culture. I don't know what you'll say, but it's basically a 17th century Russian Orthodox icon, that would have been, in a church or somewhere associated with the Russian Orthodox Church. But at some point, an Evenki carver carved it out into a mask, and it became part of the Evenki sort of spiritual life, and it would have been on a tree or some sort of post, and you see where the lower crescent is, where perhaps the mouth was. It would have been up against kind of an offering, so you could feed the sort of patron saint or the Evenki spirit. So yeah, it's this beautiful example of. I don't know if that was deliberate or if it was just a useful metal that that people could use, but it's absolutely wonderful.
You use what you've got.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. And yeah, so this was one of the other pieces that we commissioned. This is an Inukshuk, and it was built by Peter Ernick, who is Inuit originally from Rankin Inlet. So we asked him. So Inukshuk are sort of like cairns, like wayfinding in landmarkers, and we asked him to come to London and build one for us. So he flew over, and we traveled to a quarry, a limestone quarry in Kent, England. He chose the stone he wanted, and then we brought it back to the British Museum, the conservation labs, and he built it in the conservation lab. Inuksvit they're really important because as Peter Ernick says, whenever he sees one out on the land, he feels safe. He feels he knows that people, Inuit, have survived there in the past, and he's going to survive. Often that you saw the little window in it. It's called a look-through, and so they often pointed out areas of good harvest. So it was a good sealing place, or a good fishing place, or maybe a good place where caribou went through. So they're very hopeful, and these objects have become sort of a symbol of hope for the Nunavut government, which is the Inuit-run province in Canada. So their flag, for instance, has the Inukshuk on it, and it's kind of this symbol of hope. So we leave that with visitors in the exhibition as well, just a guiding, Inuit guiding symbol of hope, really.
Oh, very nice, very nice. Here's another piece of art.
Yes. Yeah, this is a really special print made by Kunuyak Ashevak. Maybe your visitors will recognize that name. She is probably one of the most well-known Inuit artists, and maybe even most well-known Canadian artists. But she was commissioned to create this print when Nunavut became a province. So in '92, she was commissioned, and it's called. It translates into Our Beautiful Land, and you can see how it's a beautiful depiction of the seasons, you know, and how, you know, life is lived with the seasons, essentially. And so people's relationship with animals and their transportation systems, you know, they change as well as their housing, you know, change throughout this this cycle of different seasons.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah, we're really happy to. We were very happy to. That became from. That was a. We borrowed that from the West Baffin Eskimo Cooperative in Canada.
And this you can see all this if you come to the British Museum. Yeah.
That's right. And for your audience who maybe can't get to London, we do have quite a number of things online, and we will be adding more. So I do hope people can check those out.
Yeah, wonderful. And we can link you up in the description of the video.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
I was in there sneaking around, and there's a lot of content there for sure.
Yeah.
Very, very nice. And you know, looking at the watch, I see that we've been going on for more than an hour.
Yeah.
Time flies, and I have a bunch of questions that I might have to ask you on a later occasion.
Yeah.
Really, really interesting, Amber. And we will have a couple of or a few questions that have come in throughout the conversation. I hope you have a few moments.
Sure, no problem.
Yeah, great. And just before we, yeah, I think, unless you want to say something important at the end here, I think maybe we should go to the questions.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. We can go to the questions. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, we've been talking about the Citi exhibition, Arctic Culture and Climate, at the British Museum. Amber Lincoln, the curator, and thank you very much, Amber.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, it's been really, really great, and I have a hope that I'm going to be able to travel to London before 21st of February 2021 to see your exhibition.
Yes, we can.
Yeah, that would be really, really wonderful. And let's go to the questions. We have some really, really interesting ones here. Well, I can start with Michelle from Canada that have asked, are the people as concerned with climate change as we are in North America? Yeah, the people in the Arctic, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's a difficult question for me to answer, but you know, I don't want to speak, and I think it would vary, of course, by community. But I can speak for my own experience in Alaska, and I lived in Alaska for a number of years and have worked. You know, have worked in Northwest Alaska for you know, since 2006. You know, living and both working and traveling in and out of there. So I can say a little bit about that, and just to say that, you know, the Western Arctic, Western Alaska, Northwest Alaska is experiencing some of the most rapid warming, and like people throughout the world, you know, individuals have all kinds of problems and issues, and certainly like economy is a problem up there, and you know some of these continued issues with assimilation policies have you know, people continue to struggle with some of that pain, but more and more climate change is is brought up as a growing concern in communities like Wales, Shishmaref, Nome, Kotzebue, Alaska, and it's becoming in many ways there are communities in Alaska that will have to relocate because of the erosion. So that's just one community that I know maybe more than the others, but so I'll just leave it at that, I guess.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Pauline from the United States has a question that maybe I will attempt answering. Can I watch this at a later time? I'm unavailable at the live stream time. Of course, Pauline, we will make this whole conversation available. There will be a lag from the end of our conversation until probably tomorrow, and then you can stream it as many times you like. And next question is from Alan from Myrtle Beach in the US, which is very interesting. What is the one characteristic that was consistent and apparent across the continent in Arctic culture? Great conversation and information. Thank you, from Alan, he says. So the one characteristic that was consistent and apparent across the continent.
Oh yeah, that's kind of a tough one. I mean, I think maybe as a curator, I should focus on material culture, and I do see see some similarities in the way people both across the North American Arctic and in the Eurasian Arctic work with material, and I would say there's this incredible resourcefulness of using materials to the extent to the furthest extent they can use materials, right? So and this sort of really understanding of how materials respond to time and to cold and to wetness and damp. So I think I would say that, and part of that is also this reuse of materials. So when something is no longer needed, parts are taken off and reused into other parts and made into something new. So there's this kind of like constant cycle of objects, raw material, objects, trash, new raw material. It's this wonderful, and that's certainly something that I think we can all use a little bit more of.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, Amber, I think we do have time for one more question, do we?
Sure.
It kind of circles in on something we spend a little bit of time on. Scott from Grapevine in United States. I'm surprised there are definition questions. To me, the Arctic has always been north of 66 degrees. Comment? Yeah.
I mean, I guess it's a geographer's, political scientist definition. Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess it kind of depends on what you discuss, don't it?
Yes. Yeah. I guess for us, when you're talking about people and cultures and sort of ways of living, it's kind of an arbitrary line, right? So and it's even changing, because some ecologists, for instance, would define the Arctic by the two major biospheres, the tundra and the taiga. But now with global warming, with climate change, these ecosystems, these biospheres are certainly changing.
Yeah.
So it's another definition.
Yeah, there's a bunch of definitions, and I find some of them really, really interesting. Some is permafrost, for example.
Exactly.
And if I'm not mistaken, you can go to Switzerland and find permafrost if you climb the highest mountain.
In the high, exactly. Yeah.
I think that that are things that are going to continue being kind of a topic, because as the Arctic becomes more accessible, perhaps, as resources are, as we evolve in what kind of resources are important, that might evolve. Norway made a case that the continental shelf that's on islands high in the high Arctic Norway, Svalbard, that also the continental shelf it was sitting on, so the shallow area outside those islands, also was part of the territory, if you like.
Yeah.
I think those things are relatively interesting, but when you put it climate and culture, I think we came to that kind of the driver for your definition of the Arctic for this purpose is the Arctic cultures, and where are they?
Yeah. I think you mentioned it. These as these environments change and resources are revealed and shipping routes are opened up, I think these definitions might be even under more scrutiny and more arguments, right, of how to define the Arctic and territories within it. So,
Well, these things are amazing to talk about, and even more fantastic to see. So, so I really hope it becomes really easy to take the subway to the British Museum. It's a wonderful place. I've been there, and I really do hope I can get the opportunity to see this exhibit.
Well, definitely, I hope so too, and please let me know.
Yeah, and definitely sailing and also meeting some of these cultures on voyages is also quite an interesting thing to do. So we hope to get to sail sometime very soon in the future.
Yeah.
Amber,
absolutely.
Thank you very much for spending this time with me here.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure chatting with you. I wish you guys the best.
Yeah, thank you very much, and I'll see you in London. Yeah.
That's good. Thank you.
Yeah, all right. Have a good day.